Shortly after completing Castle in the Sky, Hayao Miyazaki began work on another movie for Studio Ghibli. This one would be based on an original idea Miyazaki had harbored since his childhood. Its central character was inspired by his imaginings of fearsome creatures living in the forest. But getting My Neighbor Totoro into production was full of obstacles for Miyazaki. As with his previous ideas for Nausicaa and Castle in the Sky, the concept for Totoro was turned down by the executives of Ghibli's backing distributors, Tokuma Shoten, for they didn't believe that a movie about a furry forest giant guaranteed box office success. Fortunately, Miyazaki had another supporter, Toshio Suzuki. A former editor at Animage, Suzuki joined Miyazaki and Takahata when they were producing Nausicaa, and when Studio Ghibli opened, he transferred to the new facility as a producer. Suzuki proposed that Miyazaki's movie be released as a double bill with another production, Grave of the Fireflies, an adaptation of Akiyuki Nosaka's book about struggling to survive as World War II draws to a close, directed by Isao Takahata. Suzuki believed that a movie version of this story would draw school classes to the theaters due to its historical content, and that the same audience would then stay on to see another movie on the double bill. Tokuma wasn't sold on the idea. Just when things looked bleak, Suzuki found a breath of hope. Shinchosa, the publishing company who distributed the book of Grave of the Fireflies, had decided to back production for the film. The company was eager to break into the movie business, even though they knew it would cost them a lot of money to do so. As a result, Suzuki finally received the green light he had been waiting for. Ghibli soon began work on My Neighbor Totoro and Grave of the Fireflies, with support from two different publishing houses. However, both films had to be made simultaneously and set new standards in quality. As a result, the production period proved to be a nightmare, with both films competing for resources. In the end, though, all the trouble was worth it. Grave of the Fireflies and My Neighbor Totoro were released to theaters in the spring of 1988. As with Castle in the Sky, the box office take was disappointing, but the acclaim that both films received was enormous. Totoro swept many of Japan's film awards that year, while Fireflies was highly praised as a true work of cinematic art. Pairing My Neighbor Totoro and Grave of the Fireflies together was far from ideal, for the differences between the films could not be greater. My Neighbor Totoro is a light-hearted, imaginative tale about two sisters who discover wondrously magical creatures living in their backyard. The movie reveled in fantasy and heart, introducing audiences to memorable characters such as the gentle forest giant Totoro and a 12-legged cat shaped like a bus. By contrast, Grave of the Fireflies is a darker and essentially sadder story set in the last days of World War II, as told from the point of view of a soldier's son and his young sister. As such, it was portrayed with realism and displayed real emotional trauma, wrenching tears from everyone who flocked to see the movie. Takahata and Miyazaki used experiences from their own childhood in the making of both of these films. In My Neighbor Totoro, there is a subplot involving the young sister's mother recovering from an illness in a distant hospital. Miyazaki's mother suffered from tuberculosis, and the hospital mentioned in the film, Shichi Kokoyama Hospital, was famous for treating such sicknesses. With Grave of the Fireflies, Takahata drew back to the struggles he suffered as a boy during the last days of World War II, as he explains on an interview for the American DVD release.
私は 1945年
I was 10 and in 4th grade in 1945. That was the year Okayama was air-raided. Not only was my house burned, my immediate older sister and I ran away together. I had a large family, but we ran in the wrong direction towards the center of the city. The fire bombs were dropped and started fires all over. We had to go through fire by sprinkling water over our heads. By that time, the whole town was ablaze. I was lucky to be alive. My sister was injured, and scars remained. We were reunited with our family about 2 days later. It was a nightmare, the most horrible experience of my life. I used my own experience of this air raid in the film. The author of the book Grave of the Fireflies was based on, Akiyuki Nosaka, is another survivor of the Great War of Japan. Like Seita, he lost his sister to malnutrition, and his novel recounts those painful memories. My Neighbor Totoro and Grave of the Fireflies were produced in a period of turmoil for Ghibli, but now the studio had 2 new classics on its resume. In fact, demand for merchandise based on Totoro was so overwhelming that within 2 years after the theatrical showing, Ghibli's distribution of cuddly plush Totoro and Catbus dolls resulted in enormous profits. Totoro himself became Ghibli's official mascot in the same way that Mickey Mouse became an icon for Walt Disney. The studio's first real success, however, came with its next animated feature, Kiki's Delivery Service, directed by Hayao Miyazaki. Based on a best-selling Japanese children's book by Aiko Kadano, the film tells the story of an aspiring witch and her quest for independence. The film was originally planned as a project for Ghibli's younger staff members, and Miyazaki was to serve as the film's producer. Unfortunately, the project's original scriptwriter couldn't capture the spirit of the preteen and teenage girl audience for whom this film was intended, at least from Miyazaki's perspective. As a consequence, Miyazaki took over the responsibilities as the film's screenwriter and director. On July 29, 1989, Kiki's Delivery Service was released to Japanese theaters. It had the biggest box office gross of any movie that year, selling 3 times as many tickets as any of Ghibli's previous productions.